okay. So my son just lost one of his best friends, which was like a son to me. And so I have a two-part question. First of all, is there a process or steps to grief? That's the first one. And how can I help assist my son with his grief? Hey, Miss Martin, we see you.
Oh, can y'all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How are you all? Sorry I'm late.
You're fine.
No
How are
worries.
you?
I'm hanging in
How
here.
are you?
I'm hanging in here.
Okay, well, you can ask any questions that you would like. We're getting started with Miss Nicole about
Hey, Nicole.
Hey.
and Miss Sonia's on.
Oh, hey, Miss Sonia.
Hey, Miss Morn, how are you?
How are you?
I'm pressing. All is well.
It's good to see and hear you all.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I am going to start with your questions, and I want to make sure I captured them. So you're asking, are there actual steps to grief? And the second part is, how can you assist your son with grief?
Right.
Okay. All right. So as far as grief, I'm going to give you a visual demonstration that I often do when I talk about grief. So grief is a natural, normal response to any type of loss. Does not have to be just death. Any type of loss. And grief is a full experience, meaning that it involves your mind, your body, it affects you socially, financially, all of that can be impacted with grief. And a lot of times people will ask me about the 5 stages of grief. And that's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stage. When she started those stages, she was actually working with those who were actively dying. And so you will often hear people refer to like, first there's denial, and then there's anger, and then there's bargaining and depression and acceptance. But that is for those who are actively dying.
Okay.
She never intended her work to be adopted for grief stages. Okay. So I want you to watch this demonstration.
Okay.
So I have 3 containers. Okay. They're all different sizes. And in each container, I have these 2 balls. Okay. This is going to represent grief. So when I put this in the container, and the container represents you and I, okay? This is acute grief. This is when grief is fresh, when it is raw, when it is all consuming. Can you see how the balls, they are limited in how much they can move inside this vessel?
Right.
Not a lot that you can take in. It's not a lot that you can give out. Oftentimes when we see acute grief, this is when it's most intense. An example would be, maybe I didn't get a shower today. Maybe I didn't return your call. Maybe I didn't answer your text back. You didn't see me at church last Sunday. I didn't show up for work. I've been sleeping a lot. My appetite is off. These are, guess what? Normal reactions in this process of grief. Okay. And can you imagine, and we all know this, you're in this process, but yet you still have to take care of the business of grief. Plan the funeral. Your phone is ringing off the hook. People are dropping off
Mhm.
cakes and sodas and chicken. And you're right here in a state of shock. You're almost, it seems surreal. It's a dream. And you're trying to process all of this. But this is acute. And we're not meant to stay here.
Okay.
Okay. We can't live here in acute stage of grief. Okay. So
Mhm.
this is what happens when you begin to come out of this stage. Okay. And I always like to emphasize time by itself. Have you heard the cliche that says time heals all wounds? Have you all heard that?
Yes, yes.
Okay. That's not so. Time,
Uh, Okay, you freezing up a little bit. I don't know if that's me or what. It's frozen.
It's you, Sister Andrea.
is it Andrea?
You're fine, Sister Nicole. Yeah, Sister Andrea, you're frozen.
Okay. Do you want me, is she able to log out and log back in?
Yeah, I think that might be best. If you can still hear us, Sister Andrea, go ahead. Can you log it back in?
Okay. While she's logging, we'll just pause. Can anyone resonate with what I've shared thus far about this acute stage of grief?
Yes.
I can resonate and I can relate. So
Mhm.
yes, I'm following you all the way.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, are we back?
I think so. She looks like she's in the same position, but yeah,
I'm
there she goes.
back.
She's moving.
Okay.
I'm back.
Okay.
Oh, I'm gonna get this. The devil is a liar.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so you said we can't stay in that.
Right.
Okay.
This is not where we live in this grief process. And what happens, I was saying that the old cliche that time heals all wounds. Time is definitely a part of it, but there is time plus a decision to want to be made whole, plus doing the work. All of that leads you on a pathway to recovery, okay?
Mhm.
Because one thing about grief, you all, is it's a lifelong process depending on the type of loss. Okay, if it's a death-related loss, it's going to be lifelong. You're going to be adjusting lifelong because for as long as you have loved is as long as you will grieve. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Can you say that again, Nicole? I missed it. It was cut down.
For as long as you have loved is as long as you will grieve.
Wow. Okay.
It is a lifelong process. And I think a lot of people, they want to put time frames around it, like in 3 months, I should be good, or 6 months. In a year, I should be doing really well. And our society promotes that. You know, when you get time off of work for a funeral, typically it's 3 days.
Yeah, true.
And people will often flood you, right, in this beginning. Everybody comes in the beginning, okay? But 6 months out, a year out, you still need that support.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm often a believer that you should stagger your support. Even when I talk with pastors or talk with church groups, I say stagger your support where you have those that are up front, those are going to be coming in at 6 months, those are going to be coming in at a year, because it is a process, a lifelong process. And so once you begin to come out of this acute phase, right, of grief, there's some growing, there's an awakening from that stage. And so did the grief change?
No,
It's still the same, right?
right.
What changed?
The amount of space, I guess the container got bigger.
You started growing around the grief. When you begin to start to grow around the grief, this is where you would see people trying to re-engage with life, people trying to step out in a new world, because it's never the same. Once you have experienced a loss, especially a death-related loss, you are forever changed. And the world that you knew, the world that you lived in, worked in, has forever changed, and you are learning to adjust. Okay? This is beginning to adjust. So right here, there's a little bit more room. So you might see me at church. Maybe I'm trying to get out a little bit more. I'm talking more. I'm on the phone. I'm returning texts. I'm trying to make sense of this, and I'm trying to grow through this. Okay? So this is what that growth process looks like. And then you keep growing, Andrea. Did the grief change?
No,
What changed?
the amount of room. Yeah.
This stage right here, this is what we call integrated grief. And what that means is you have reached a point in your grief process where you can experience grief and still live your life fully and completely. You're going to still grieve, because guess what? There's still going to be triggers. It could be, and when I say trigger, I don't mean it in a negative way, because you can have triggers of sadness as well as joy.
Right.
Okay. Christmas is going to come up. Thanksgiving is going to come up. A birthday, a wedding anniversary date. There are going to be these moments that you're going to be triggered. So you may come back here. Okay, I want you to catch that, because just because I showed you container 1, 2, and 3 does not mean that process goes like that.
Right.
It's an ebb and flow, and up and down. As a grief counselor, I want to make sure that there's movement. Movement is healthy. So if Christmas, Thanksgiving, maybe you're in the Walmart and somebody walks by you and they look just like the person that you lost. You may go here for a little while. And what we hope is that you don't stay here as long as you did before, as you did in the beginning. Okay, but it is an ebb and flow, and so you are pivoting this grief. So does that help answer your question about kind of the steps or kind of the process with grief?
That's really good. I write notes as you go, and that's really good, so that it can kind of help me to recognize and know what it is within, like the acute and, you know, the integrated, as far as grief, knowing that I can know what it is and recognize the signs, and to know too that you may move forward, but you may also go back, you know, but you got to keep moving along. You don't want to stay just in one place.
That's right. And when I'm working with someone, I do have what we call tasks of mourning, and I have that on a worksheet, and I'll be happy to email it out. But it's 4 tasks. And so, the word task means you have to work, right?
Right.
That very first task is facing the reality of the loss.
Mhm.
And it's a difference between knowing it intellectually, the facts, and knowing it
Mhm.
emotionally.
Oh,
Okay.
wow. Yeah, it is. That's a
And facing the reality of the loss is not a one-time thing. It happens over and over and over again. And I can give just a quick example. There are still days where, there was one day I wanted to talk to my mom, right? So for a second, I had to face the reality that she's not here. I almost picked up the phone. But in that brief moment, I had to come back to the reality, okay, she's not here. And that task can be difficult, especially for those who have loved ones, maybe in the military, when body does not come home. How can you really face the reality of the loss?
Right.
So there's so many layers to that, but that's the first task. And that task happens over and over throughout that process. The second one is you have to endure the pain.
Mm.
There's no way around it. And so as a grief counselor, part of my job is to hold space for your pain and to allow you to grieve fully. Because sometimes we cannot grieve with family because they're grieving too. Sometimes we need a neutral person, a safe place to freely unpack all that we need to. And I often say, honey, you can say it like you want to say it here. If you scream at the top of your lungs, you will not scare me. If you roll on the floor, I'm just going to make sure you're safe, that you don't bump into nothing sharp, but you can roll on the floor and do what you need to do to process pain. And I'll have, different techniques for that. And then also you have to relocate the person. And I'm speaking of a death loss. That's the term we use, is to relocate from the physical to a more spiritual presence. You don't have to lose connection with your loved one. You can maintain, and I have stories all the time where people talk with me about different signs that their loved one, gives them. They dream dreams of them. They have a special bond, special rituals that they do to maintain connection. But the task of relocating and adjusting. And then the last one is to make meaning. What am I going to do with this loss? How has this loss changed me? How do I want to show up in the world now? What do I want to do with this? Do I want to start a scholarship? Do I want to start a foundation? Do I now want to work in the very area? That would be me, y'all. Work in the very area where I have the lived experience of loss. And so we learn to make meaning. So I just had to throw that in there. And then you asked about assisting with grief. Am I able to share my screen?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
ask Miss Sonia.
Okay, it won't let me. Somebody has to give me permission, but if not, it's okay. I will send out a worksheet that I have. I did have it.
Okay,
It is some tips
Sister,
for,
Sister Nicole, try
Yes, ma'am.
again. You should be able to now.
Okay, thank you. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can pull that up. Slide it over.
while she's doing that, I'm showing that we had someone else come in, Revvly. Could you tell me who that is so I can have you accounted for?
It's me, Amanda.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Okay,
Thank
is
you.
everybody,
Good.
is everybody
Okay.
able to see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, this is Dr. Denise Rollins. I attended one of her trainings and I really like her worksheet. She has 10 tips for those who are survivors of grief and 10 tips for supporters. And so let's just look at the supporters because you were asking how you can assist your son. And a lot of times we may feel like, well, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And here are some things. When in doubt about what to say, just be there. Your presence can mean more than anything.
Mhm.
So you don't always have to have a word, but if you do, share it. But your presence is also very valuable. And just let them know how much you care about them. Okay. And it says right
Mhm.
behind it, the bereaved often need your connection more than anything else. Okay.
Mhm.
Replace cliches with thoughtful words from your heart. Some of the things that people say, it can sound like a cliche, but if you can just express yourself from your heart in your own words.
Mhm.
I can use myself for an example. Some things that I have heard, especially as a young widow. Well, honey, you're young. You can get married again. Well, that may be true, but there's a certain way to say it and a certain timing to say that to
Right.
someone. You know what I mean? And so we just need to make sure that we're speaking from our hearts. You can do notes, cards, meaningful gestures to show how much you care. Don't avoid the person because you don't know what to say. So you don't have to avoid them. Ask the person how they're doing and mean it.
Right.
There's no need in asking somebody how they're doing if you're not going to stick around and listen to the answer. Because that is a question we do in greeting, like, hey, how you doing? And most of the time we'll answer in simple phrases, I'm doing good, or oh, it's a rough day. But somebody who's grieving may need to unpack. So you might need to stay and sit down, okay, to listen. Know that there are many ways to reach out: a meal, a visit, donations, gifts. So many ways that you can show your love and take initiative. So a lot of times people will say, well, honey, if you need me, call me. But if you see, for example, the grass needs cutting, you could take initiative and say, especially if you have a close relationship with the person. Now, I'm not saying do this with someone that you don't have a close relationship with, but if you see that the grass needs cutting, say, sis, I'm coming over at 2. we're gonna get your grass cut.
Mhm.
Or I'll be by with some groceries.
Right.
Mhm.
Sister Nicole, I hope I'm not out of line here, but I kind of want to build upon that statement
Mhm.
that, which I think all this is just great. I can definitely relate. But you said if you have a relationship, for instance, if the needs cutting, just cut it. Well, based on what kind of relationship you have with someone, where is that blurred line? Because you might see, or you may know, someone is grieving and sinking, so to speak, but you may not have that relationship where, you just go, but a best friend relationship, let's say it that way. You may have an acquaintanceship with someone,
Mhm.
but that person needs the help, but they're not willing to reach out. How do you address someone in that situation? Because sometimes, not sometimes, you don't want to be overbearing.
Mhm. Mhm.
You don't want to necessarily be minimizing the situation either. So somewhere in there, how do you approach it? I guess is where I'm trying to go with that.
Absolutely. And that's why I wanted to make sure we had that factor of relationship, because that discernment is going to be key, especially if you're not in the inner circle. If you, like you said in that example, you were more of an acquaintance, and sometimes you may have to link up with the inner circle to say, maybe, and I'm going to just use this as an example. So maybe the grieved person is a neighbor, and you all know each other, but you may also know her close circle of family and friends. And that may be your way in respectfully. You may say, well, Johnny, look, I see that your auntie, her grass needs cut, and I have a lawnmower. If you want to let her know that I can come over Saturday at 2, if that's okay with her, I'll take care of it. Be more than happy to. And it just depends on where they are in this grief process, because Sonia, if they're here, honey, they can't even breathe to form the words to ask for help. When you are really, really consumed with grief, it may take a minute. It may take a minute. And it just depends on how strong that support system is. Because that's one of the things that I look for as a grief counselor as well, is who are the people that's going to walk with you in the high and the low. Who are the sustainable people, consistent people in your life that are going to walk with you? And so you can offer respectfully to do that task. It's still taking the initiative to offer. And you're even offering with concrete information. So it's not like you said, girl, I'll cut your grass. No, I can cut your grass on Saturday at 2:00. Does that make sense?
That does. It definitely does.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else have another question before I move on?
So, Ms. Nicole, I just like to say I appreciate everything that you've gone over thus far. But going back, Ms. Sonia, to what you were speaking about, I think for me, I'm just speaking from my perspective, is that I think sometimes when we are acquainted with other people and they're not necessarily in our circle, I think we have to allow, as you say, Ms. Nicole, that discernment of spirit in allowing yourself to be who you are. So when you approach people, it's out of like out of your heart. It's who you are. It's being who you are. And I think sometimes we push back a little bit because we say, I really don't know that person. But I think it's so important that we be who we are and let people know that we do care and not hold back, because a lot of people, I always say in my nursing career, I tell patients, they say, you don't have to do this, you don't have to, but I say, I believe God put us here for a purpose. We need each other. And I don't believe we're just here. We're supposed to be here for one another, no matter who it is. It could be somebody who, the neighbor, somebody who we really don't know, but we should always be authentic and share ourselves when we do know people are experiencing, grief or the loss of something or someone. So you can never go wrong being yourself.
Absolutely. That's so good. So good. Absolutely. That spirit of discernment and genuineness. Absolutely. Absolutely. Number 7 on this list, I touched on it already. Don't end your support right after the funeral. A lot of times when I sit with grievers, they talk about people dropping off, and the real work, the real loneliness and pain of grief is after the funeral. There was a quote that I read that says, the funeral was like everyone came to a big party and left, and I was there to clean up the mess. I was stuck with me. And I thought that was so powerful and so accurate. So accurate. When people return back to their life, they go back to work, they go back, home, and you are there to navigate your life, starting to navigate your life without all of that support like it was in the beginning. So I am a advocate for staggering support. Staggering support. So holidays, someone had, a loss, check on them. Do a kind gesture. Whatever information, and again, depending on how close you are with the person, if you knew that that person's wife, they went to they went to church together every Sunday, and now they're sitting alone. Maybe one Sunday you sit on the same pew. Just something simple. We don't even have to overthink it. Just see where you can plug in. If that's your assignment, just see where you can plug in. The next one, number 8, be sensitive to the survivor's needs. Patience, love, understanding. This phase right here, it's not pretty. It's not pretty. And sometimes we can be uncomfortable with others' pain, and we want to fix it. We want to say, oh, it's gonna be okay. Let me just, do something for you. And that's not always the case. That's not always a fixable solution to this type of pain. So we just want to be sensitive to what they're going through. Okay. And then number 9 and 10, if a survivor reaches out to you, reach back. It takes a lot, especially here. If they're trying to reach out and trying to just want to talk with you, maybe there's something about you that is drawing them, and they feel like, okay, you're a safe person. I can ask you to do this, or I can ask you for this. But when they do, it is so important that you reach back to reassure them, okay, that I took this risk to reach out and they responded. That increases their faith. That lets them know that someone is out there for them and assigned to them. And then the last one is know that the role you play in helping a survivor is very special in the healing process. And I think we all know that. I think we all know that. So those are some tips as a supporter. Miss Andrea, do you think that was helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like I said, you know, like I said, with that being my son, you know, sometimes we want to take on certain roles. I may, as a mother with him grieving, not, you know, knowing where he is in his grief, and I may want to say something. I'm not going to say necessarily I may not say the right thing. I may be in that mommy mode, and I want to be in a mode as a supporter, not as I want to, of course, it'll be coming from his mother if this is making sense, but I want it to be in the right context, because oftentimes I know with my adult children, I can, instead of me sticking to the subject, sometimes I can get off track, or I can go on a religious tantrum, not saying that in a bad way, or, you know, and at the time that may not be what they need to hear, or I can say what I feel is best instead of just allowing them to talk and let me know what their thoughts are or what it is that they're going through. So this is going to be very helpful. And for me, so that I can, you know, help my son navigate through it and help me to navigate through it as well, because it was a loss for me as well. So that I don't get, you know, get off in that mode to where, okay, well, Brandon, you need to, you know, okay, well, that's, you know, enough of that, or seeming like I'm being insensitive, or just speaking strictly from a mother's point of view, or what it is that I feel like he should be doing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you said something so key, is that both of you are grieving.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so you have to be self-aware of how you're carrying your grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being able to navigate that while as mother just attending right to him
Mm-hmm.
and his grief. And that is trial and error. There's no perfect way to do that. So I want to make sure that you're giving yourself grace as well as him.
Right.
A whole
Absolutely.
lot.
There was two things that she said, if you don't mind, that I won't speak long, but it was two things that you said, Andrea, that kind of caught my attention. It was, one, I want to be sure that I'm speaking in a manner that is supportive and not necessarily about how, you know, you're going into that maternal role. Well, first thing that hit me was, you have to be your authentic self. And he's gonna expect some of that, you know, maternal from you, you know, but then, as Sister Nicole said, self-aware of what we say. I think as mothers, we can, you know, we want to push them back into shape and get them back into, you know, doing as he did. But I think it's that balance of, you still are the mother, and he expects you to provide that religion to him, to give him that support through your area, your subject matter expert, so he's going to look to that. So I wouldn't say you just, you don't be your authentic self. But again, it's awareness of knowing that, our tongues can get, maybe not at this particular point in time. This is not where we need to do this at this particular point in time. So I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm thinking incorrectly, Sister Nicole, I'm just thinking, as mothers, and I've gone through a lot of this and still going through it right now, and also being the support system, it's a matter of all of our different personality types, and knowing that I am perceived more as just that straightforward, just, can be a bit hard, but I am that maternal role. So having to let them see another side of me too. I'm not just that mother who's just wanting so many great things for them, and whatever the situation may be, but they see a side of me of grieving as well. And that's allowed them to, I think, grieve, and also, transition through these various stages. So I just was kind of, as I was listening to her, these were things that just popped in my head. It's like, don't change your authentic self. Sometimes we as parents, we just have to allow them to see more of our authenticity, what I'm trying to say, and go from there.
Absolutely.
I hope that made sense, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
As parents, we are models for our children. We model grief. One of the questions I often ask is, who taught you how to grieve? Where did you learn to grieve? What was your first experience with grief? And so, I do a loss timeline, and we talk about that because we often bring forward as children what we've learned in those early childhood years with grief and loss, and we bring it to our adult years. So we are the models for our children, just like our parents or those who were in charge of us were models for us. And that kind of, that even touches on our meeting yesterday, Andrea. I just thought about that. But I wanted you to quickly look at this because you're navigating. Remember, I said you're going to be self-aware about you and also being attentive to your son's needs. But look at how grief impacts all of this. Physical,
Yes.
emotional, spiritual, mental, and behavior. Look at how that is described. If you were to look at that, you probably could circle a few under each. Maybe. Is that surprising to any of you all as you look at, and this is normal. So I want you to know that this is a normal reaction. This is not displaying any type of mental disorder. This is what's right with you. It's not what's wrong with you. It's what's right with you when you're experiencing grief.
Wow. Yep, that's a lot. That is a lot.
So that's why I said trial and error, right? It's no perfect way to grieve. It's no perfect way to offer support. It is the genuineness of knowing your position, right? The genuineness of knowing your intentions, your motives, and deciding on how you want to show that in the best way that you can.
Right. And I think too that again, people, if you don't, you just got to learn how to process, the grief, process it, and not just brush it off. I don't think, when I say not brush it off, you got to allow, I think being educated on grief as well is very important, because again, you can see where you are in certain stages. You can see where you are. It's all normal. But if you don't have the tools, it's kind of like you out there in a ship and it's sailing and you just kind of going along with the waves. But if you have a compass, the compass can kind of guide you and tell you where you're going or how to get where you're going. So I think this is just so relevant, because I have learned, certain things with the emotional, physical, and mental. And then, like I said, the different stages as not only of a support, but also, with me going through as well. And I can say, okay, this is not unusual, or maybe this is where I am at this time, instead of just doing it. I can be aware, like I said, it was something that you said, it's not enough. What did you say? Knowing it factually and emotionally are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
So, you knowing something factually and emotionally as well, the emotional part of it can you can take that emotional part of it and know what's going on with that, instead of just having in head knowledge, the emotional part. You can say, okay, yeah, this is where I am, so this is normal, and just give, like you said, give yourself some grace. Give
Yes.
yourself some grace.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Will we get these PowerPoints? Will we get these, Nicole?
So yes, I will email you this one and the tips sheet. I will email those to you, and I will even the task of mourning. I'll give you that too, because that's just a really
Okay.
good guide. Okay.
Mhm.
When I describe those, I like to say that those are just lighthouses on your ocean. Okay.
Right,
You're
okay.
headed in the right direction when you work around those tasks of mourning. So I will send those 3. I'm gonna make myself a note.
Okay. Because I would like to share, like I said, I would like to share this with my son. He's a very intellectual person. He likes to read and know things. So I think that would benefit him in having this as well as myself.
Absolutely. And I have a grief reading list with some books if you want that as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Because that's something that we're going to experience in life.
Guaranteed.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
one thing that is universal.
Yes, ma'am. You don't
Mhm.
discriminate.
Mm-mm.
Does anyone else have any questions for Miss Nicole while we're on? Because I know I don't want to keep, this has been beneficial
I
to
just
me.
want to ask a question. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to know, could this information be shared with the young men? It's very valuable, and I'm just sitting here. I don't know everything, and I don't profess to know everything, but I'm just thinking about this time that we're in. Like a lot of people, I don't know. I believe this would be helpful for my son. Because we have experienced a lot of loss, and it's not just loss in a person, but I think grief can also be expressed in things, or that something that was very important to you is part of a loss. And I'm just wanting to know, Miss Nicole, is this something that you could present to the young men? You know, given, because I really think that it's valuable, and I know for me, I believe my son would get a lot of information from, because you know, sometimes you can tell them, but hearing it from an outside person, sometimes they understand it, or you know, get the gist of it a little bit better. So I just wanted to know if it's something that you could do for them.
Yes, I could definitely share some information um, with them. And you said something so key, Ms. Martin, is that loss can be both tangible and not.
Mhm.
So people have a loss of safety, a loss of trust, a loss of identity, a loss of job, a loss of a marriage, a loss of a relationship. And so it's just not for bereavement. Absolutely. And just learning to navigate loss as a part of life is necessary. It's a necessary skill. Absolutely.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Miss Nicole, is it anything that you would like to leave us with before we end?
I'm going to leave you with this quote from Earl Grossman. The only cure for grief is to grieve. It is simple, but profound.
Yes, very
Mhm.
much so. Now that you sit and think about it.
Mhm.
Now that you sit and think about it. Well, we just want to say thank you so much, Mr. Cole. I really do appreciate you, coming on, sharing. And I thank the parents that, came on to listen. I hope that, you all gained something or have a takeaway with this, and not only just take away and to apply. And Miss Martin, I would definitely speak to Marcel in regards to that, because just like you said, and like Ms. Nicole said, that grief is more than just a physical loss, and these are times, like we said with COVID, that, the young generation with the suicidal rate being the way that it is, we are experiencing grief, and young kids may not have experienced grief uh, at the rate that they would have had COVID not been in place, So we know that they have had a loss to where they couldn't be with their friends, they couldn't socialize, that they had to adapt to going from one extreme as far as being in a school setting to being at home day in and day out. So it was a change. And I know that if it, wore on us, it wore on them as well. But I believe that, we don't talk about it as far as our, younger kid, the youth are concerned. We're not talking about it. We're experiencing a lot of mental health as far as a lot of adults, but we're not talking about it a lot as far as, youth and kids are concerned. So I would definitely get with Marcel and let him know what was discussed. And again, I'm not going to keep everyone. It's 8:00. And again, this was very helpful to me, Mr. Cole. I will look for that information, and I definitely will be sharing that information with my son and with those that I know that are, in the process of mourning, and take it in for myself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Miss Andrea, am I emailing this to the Accelerating Men email?
No, could you send it to me?
What's your email address?